Welcome back to the Haunted Lore podcast, where we uncover the darkest mysteries and most chilling legends that lurk in the shadows of our world. We're traveling to the windswept prairies of Manitoba, Canada, where an ancient stone church sits brooding beside the Red River, harboring secrets that have terrified visitors for over a century and a half. St. Andrew's, on the Red Anglican Church, may appear to be nothing more than a picturesque historical landmark during daylight hours. But as darkness falls across the Canadian prairie, this Gothic revival sanctuary transforms into something far more sinister. Today, we'll explore the twisted legends, unexplained phenomena, and bone-chilling encounters that have made this holy ground one of Manitoba's most notorious haunted locations. From mysterious disappearances tied to an ancient walking ritual to spectral figures that glide through moonlit graveyards, today's story will take you deep into the heart of one of Canada's most enduring supernatural mysteries. So dim the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for a journey into the haunted history of St. Andrew's on the Red Church. What ancient foundations hold the secrets of St. Andrew's on the Red? To understand the supernatural forces that seem to permeate St. Andrew's on the Red Church, we must first journey back to the mid-19th century, when the very stones of this sacred building were first laid upon the Manitoba prairie. The year was 1845, and the Red River colony was still a remote outpost, where the howling prairie winds carried whispers of both hope and desperation. Archdeacon William Cochrane, a man whose vision would prove both blessed and cursed, conceived of a grand stone church that would serve the scattered Anglican community along the Red River. Having arrived in the Red River colony in 1825, he had spent decades ministering to fur traders, settlers, and indigenous peoples in one of the most isolated regions of North America. Perhaps it was this exposure to so many different spiritual traditions and beliefs that would later contribute to the otherworldly atmosphere that seems to cling to his greatest architectural achievement. The construction began with great ceremony on July 4th, 1845, when Reverend John Smithhurst laid the cornerstone. Local limestone was quarried from nearby sources, and the skilled mason Duncan McRae began the painstaking process of creating what would become the oldest Anglican stone church west of the Great Lakes. The construction took 4 long years to complete, years marked by harsh prairie winters, flooding springs, and the constant struggle against the unforgiving landscape. But there were older stories about this stretch of land beside the Red River, stories that the European settlers chose to ignore. The indigenous peoples of the region had their own tales about forces that dwelled beneath the prairie soil, ancient spirits that did not welcome disturbance. Perhaps these warnings should have been heeded, for even during construction, workers reported strange occurrences, tools that moved on their own, shadows that fell in impossible directions, and whispered voices that seemed to emerge from the limestone itself as it was shaped and set into place. When Archdeacon Cochrane himself was laid to rest in the cemetery in 1865, his grave was positioned near the church entrance according to his own specific wishes. Local tradition holds that his final request was to watch over his creation for all eternity, a vigil that some believe he continues to maintain long after death claimed his mortal form. Why does walking backwards around the church make people vanish? The ritual known as walking Widdershins around St. Andrew's on the Red Church represents one of the most chilling and specific supernatural legends ever recorded in Canadian folklore. This practice, which involves walking counterclockwise or backwards around the building 3 times, carries with it a promise that is both simple and terrifyingly absolute. Complete disappearance from existence. The legend differs from typical ghost stories or supernatural warnings in its mathematical precision. Not death, not transformation, not being spirited away to another realm, but total erasure from reality itself. Those who complete the 3-circuit ritual, according to local tradition, are not simply removed from the world of the living, but are forgotten so completely that they are erased from all memory, all records, and all evidence that they ever existed at all. The origins of this specific curse trace back to Celtic and Germanic traditions, where walking Widdershins around sacred structures was believed to tear holes in the fabric between worlds. Scottish and Irish immigrants who settled in the Red River Colony brought these ancient superstitions with them. But something about the Manitoba prairie seemed to amplify their power beyond anything recorded in the old country. The 3-fold repetition required by the ritual carries deep mystical significance across multiple spiritual traditions. 3 represents completion, the bridging of different planes of existence, and the point at which intention becomes irrevocable action. Local folklore suggests that the first circuit weakens the walker's connection to our reality, the second circuit begins the process of separation, and the third circuit completes their removal from existence entirely. What makes this legend particularly disturbing is the complete absence of evidence for or against its validity. No missing persons reports correlate with the ritual because, if the legend is true, there would be no one left to remember the missing person well enough to file such a report. The very nature of the curse makes it impossible to prove or disprove through conventional investigation. Some researchers have noted that the legend may have evolved as a psychological protection mechanism, creating a story so terrifying that it would prevent curious individuals from testing the boundaries between the sacred and the profane. Others suggest that the ritual may indeed open doorways that should remain closed, doorways that lead not to death, but to something far more permanent and final. What spectral figures roam the moonlit cemetery? The cemetery surrounding St. Andrew's on the Red Church serves as a theatre for supernatural encounters that have been documented continuously since the late 1800s. As prairie mist rises from the Red River on humid summer nights, the weathered headstones and ancient burial plots become populated by figures that exist somewhere between memory and reality. The woman in white appears as a tall, elegant figure, whose flowing pale dress seems to generate its own luminescence. She moves between the graves with purpose, searching for something that remains forever beyond her reach. Her appearances follow a predictable pattern. She emerges during the hours between midnight and 3 in the morning, particularly when fog provides cover for her supernatural manifestations. Witnesses describe her voice carrying across impossible distances, calling out names in what sounds like an archaic dialect. Local historians have attempted to match these names with burial records, discovering that some correspond to individuals who died during cholera epidemics in the 1870s, while others remain completely unidentifiable in any historical documentation. The man in black serves as her dark counterpoint, a towering presence whose long coat seems to absorb rather than reflect light. Unlike the woman in white's melancholy search, his movements suggest active malevolence. He appears suddenly between headstones, studying living visitors with eyes that burn with crimson fire. Those who have encountered his direct gaze report experiencing a form of supernatural judgment, as if their entire life history is being evaluated by forces beyond human understanding. Perhaps most unsettling is the presence of the child shadows, small figures that dart between the larger monuments and seem to play games that follow rules unknown to the living world. These apparitions appear to be the spirits of children who died during the settlement's early years, when infant mortality rates were tragically high. They are heard more often than seen, their laughter echoing across the cemetery grounds in ways that sound joyful and heartbreaking simultaneously. The collective behavior of these spirits suggests they exist in a shared supernatural ecosystem, aware of each other but following individual purposes that occasionally intersect. Witnesses have reported seeing all three types of apparitions present during the same visit, creating a complex spiritual drama that plays out nightly among the tombstones. What unholy music echoes from the silent church? The phantom organ concerts that emanate from St. Andrew's on the Red Church represent perhaps the most beautiful and disturbing supernatural phenomenon associated with the location. These ethereal performances occur during the deepest hours of the night, filling the prairie silence with sacred music that is both impossible and undeniably real to those who hear it. The church has not housed a functioning pipe organ for decades, yet the music that flows from within the stone walls demonstrates a level of musical sophistication that would have been extraordinary even during the building's active years of worship. The phantom organist performs complex arrangements of traditional hymns, but with embellishments and variations that suggest either divine inspiration or supernatural enhancement of human musical ability. The concerts are accompanied by the sounds of a full congregation participating in worship. Witnesses describe hearing voices raised in harmony, the rustling of period clothing, the opening and closing of hymn books, and even the sound of children's voices joining the adult choir. These auditory manifestations create the impression of complete church services being conducted for attendees who exist only in the realm of spirit. Recording equipment brought near the church during these supernatural performances consistently malfunctions in ways that suggest active interference rather than simple technical failure. Devices that function perfectly before and after the phantom concerts produce only static or complete silence when operated during the musical manifestations, as if the phenomena exist on frequencies that earthly technology cannot capture. The selection of hymns performed during these ghostly services follows patterns that church historians have connected to the musical preferences of Archdeacon William Cochrane. Many of the compositions were favorites from his era of leadership, suggesting that his spirit may be conducting eternal services for parishioners who found spiritual comfort within the church's walls during their earthly lives. Most disturbing are the reports of visitors hearing their own names called during what sounds like congregational roll calls. These supernatural summons create an almost irresistible compulsion to enter the church and join the phantom worship service, an invitation that those who resist describe as requiring tremendous spiritual and psychological effort to decline. What malevolent eyes watch from the darkness? The disembodied red eyes that float through the St. Andrew's on the Red Church Cemetery represent the most aggressively supernatural phenomenon associated with the location. Unlike the other ghostly manifestations that seem to be remnants of past human lives, These glowing crimson orbs appear to represent something entirely other. Entities whose nature and purpose remain completely alien to human understanding. The eyes appear as pairs floating approximately 6 feet above ground level, moving with coordinated intelligence that suggests they belong to conscious entities rather than simple supernatural residue. Their crimson illumination pulses with an internal fire that seems to intensify when living visitors are present, as if the proximity of life force strengthens their manifestation. These entities demonstrate active hunting behavior, pursuing visitors through the cemetery grounds while maintaining distances that keep them just beyond the reach of artificial illumination. They appear to communicate through methods that transcend sound, coordinating their movements in ways that suggest collective intelligence or shared purpose. Close encounters with the red eyes result in psychological effects that extend far beyond simple fear. Witnesses report experiencing supernatural paralysis during direct confrontations, finding themselves unable to move or look away while the entities conduct what feels like examinations of their souls. During these forced encounters, the eyes project vivid mental images directly into the observer's consciousness, visions that typically involve scenes of judgment, suffering, and spiritual evaluation. The eyes demonstrate different behavioral patterns when manifesting inside the church building versus the cemetery grounds. Within the sacred walls, they appear more restrained, often positioning themselves near religious artifacts or memorial plaques, as if studying the spiritual history embedded in these objects. This behavior suggests they may be gathering information about the individuals buried in the cemetery or the spiritual activities that have taken place within the church over its long history. Local folklore has developed several theories about the nature of these entities, ranging from souls trapped between judgment and resolution to manifestations of ancient evil forces that were awakened during the church's construction. What remains consistent across all encounters is their apparent ability to see into the spiritual condition of living observers, making their presence feel like a form of supernatural audit of one's moral and spiritual standing. What nightmares haunt those who dare to sleep near the church? The supernatural influence of St. Andrew's on the Red Church extends beyond physical encounters into the realm of sleep and dreams, where visitors often experience nightmares so vivid and psychologically devastating that they require professional counseling to process the trauma. These are not ordinary bad dreams, but rather intrusive experiences that feel more real than waking life. The most common nightmare involves the church's iron gates rattling with increasing violence as an invisible countdown progresses towards some catastrophic supernatural event. In these dreams, the metallic clanging penetrates directly into the dreamer's consciousness, creating panic that grows stronger with each impact. The dreamer understands instinctively that they must prevent whatever is approaching, but finds themselves powerless to intervene as the gates strain against forces that exist beyond the physical world. Other recurring nightmares trap the dreamer inside the church during phantom worship services attended entirely by the spirits of the dead. The dreamer finds themselves seated among translucent congregants from different historical periods, all participating in hymns whose lyrics speak of judgment and eternal consequences. The realization that they are the only living person present typically triggers awareness that they are being evaluated by the supernatural congregation for some form of spiritual worthiness. These nightmares often feature a version of Archdeacon Cochrane delivering sermons that seem specifically tailored to the dreamer's personal spiritual struggles and moral failures. The ghostly preacher demonstrates impossible knowledge of intimate details from the dreamer's life, addressing sins and fears that the individual has never shared with another living person. This supernatural invasion of privacy creates lasting psychological trauma that extends far beyond the dream experience itself. Perhaps most terrifying are the dreams that compel the dreamer to perform the Widdershins ritual against their conscious will. In these nightmares, the individual finds their body moving independently through the darkness, walking backwards around the church while their mind screams in protest. Shadow figures gather to observe the ritual's progress, their anticipation growing stronger with each completed circuit around the building. The medical professionals who have studied these cases note that the nightmares demonstrate a cumulative psychological effect that intensifies over time rather than diminishing as traumatic dreams typically do. This progression suggests the nightmares may represent ongoing supernatural contact rather than simple products of disturbed sleep, a connection that continues long after the initial visit to the church grounds has ended. As we reach the end of today's journey into the supernatural mysteries of St. Andrew's on the Red Church, we're left with more questions than answers about this ancient stone sanctuary that sits beside the Manitoba prairie, like a doorway between our world and something far more mysterious and dangerous. The phenomena we've explored paint a picture of a location where multiple forms of supernatural activity converge and interact in ways that challenge our understanding of life, death, and the boundaries between different planes of existence. Whether these manifestations represent the restless spirits of Manitoba's early settlers, ancient forces awakened during the church's construction, or entities that exist completely outside human comprehension, remains an open question that continues to draw investigators and the genuinely curious to this remote landmark. What cannot be disputed is the transformative effect that encounters with St. Andrew's on the Red Church have on those who experience them. The consistency of reports across different time periods, cultural backgrounds, and levels of skepticism suggests that something genuinely extraordinary continues to occur at this location, something that exists independent of belief, expectation, or psychological predisposition. The church continues to stand today, its limestone walls holding their secrets as tightly as they hold the prairie winds that sweep across the Red River Valley. During daylight hours, it serves as a beautiful reminder of Manitoba's colonial heritage and the faith of its early settlers. But as darkness falls and supernatural forces begin to stir, St. Andrew's on the Red Church becomes something else entirely. A place where the impossible feels inevitable and the boundary between our world and whatever lies beyond becomes dangerously thin. Thank you for joining me today on the Haunted Lore podcast as we explored one of Canada's most enduring supernatural mysteries. If today's episode has awakened your appetite for the unexplained, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We have many more chilling tales waiting to be told, from haunted battlefields where ancient conflicts continue to rage, to cursed objects that carry their dark histories wherever they go, to places where reality itself seems to have been permanently damaged. Leave us a review and tell us about your own supernatural encounters, or suggest locations you'd like us to investigate in future episodes. The darkness holds more mysteries than we could explore in 1,000 lifetimes, and we're just getting started.